Hello students, welcome to TCOM 408 online. This is video number 9 and I'm your professor this summer, Dr. Mike Gerhard from the Department of Telecommunications. Hey, we've been talking in the last video about truth, and I want to talk more about this, especially in terms of the world of journalism. That is the basic goal of journalism, to get at the truth and to serve the public, to share this truth with the public. So we'll continue our discussion now of truth and honesty in mass communications. And where we expect the highest levels of truth, of course, are in the reporting and the coverage done by journalists. So let's talk about the ethics of journalism. Now, you might think, this doesn't matter to me, I'm not going to be a journalist. Well, every citizen should be able to judge the performance and the ethical performance of the news media. Plus, you might be interested in making some other form of nonfiction content, like a documentary. Well, documentarians follow the basic ethical framework that's presented for journalists. So this might apply a little bit more than you think. Excuse me. No, I don't have the virus. I just have allergies. Now, most people don't find the news media, the national news media, very believable. In fact, America's trust in the national news media is really at an all-time low. A Gallup poll from 2018 revealed that just 40%, 4 out of 10 Americans have trust and confidence in the news media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. To many Americans, the news media are providing way too much misinformation, bias, and inaccuracy. According to this Gallup poll, 62% of the public find the traditional news media to be biased. So a low level of trust in the news media. Now, why is there a low level of trust? Well, the news media get attacked quite a bit as the scapegoat, and criticized for their performance, and occasionally journalists are caught committing cardinal sins or violating categorical or moral imperatives. And of course, this tarnishes the institution of the journalism, of the news media. Now, there aren't too many absolute no-nos in the world of journalism or categorical imperatives, but here are 2 of the big ones: fabrication, making stuff up, and plagiarism, stealing other people's work. Now, plagiarism will get you in trouble no matter what field you go into: entertainment, video games, politics, education. Plagiarism is a cardinal sin that's universal. And in the world of journalism, making stuff up is also a categorical no-no. Now, occasionally, reporters will get caught. This happened to Brian Williams back in 2015, the NBC News anchor. He was suspended for embellishing, for misrepresenting events, for making claims. I think these were about his personal safety and what he was observing when he was covering wars and natural disasters, but embellishing, exaggerating the danger he was in. Now, embellishment is a sin. You cannot even afford to embellish or to pump up your resume. Be very careful about how you represent yourself. Now, you can not only be demoted for your sins in the world of journalism, but you can actually get fired and become a textbook embarrassment. This happened in 2003 with a young New York Times reporter named Jason Blair, who got caught not only fabricating, but also plagiarizing. If you get caught doing this in the world of journalism, you will be terminated. Stephen Glass was an aspiring, bright, young writer in the late 1990s who worked for a very important magazine called The New Republic. And he was an award-winning journalist, but eventually he was exposed. He was making things up, fabricating his stories. The worst thing you can do in journalism is to make stuff up. Journalism is about the truth. A classic example of fabrication occurred in the 1980s when a Washington Post reporter was exposed as a fraud. This was Janet Cook, and she actually won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting on Jimmy, the 8-year-old heroin addict. The only problem? There was no Jimmy. She made the story up. More recently, Rolling Stone got caught with a horrible piece of journalism that documented a rape on campus. This was at the University of Virginia. And the Rolling Stone had to actually retract this article and is facing major litigation because they published a fabricated story about sexual assault on college campuses. So journalists should never fabricate and make things up and should never plagiarize. Journalistic truth is defined as a story that has these attributes or characteristics. First, it's fair and balanced. It represents all sides of the story. It's not slanted one way or the other. Accuracy, that's the cardinal rule of journalism. You get it right. It has to be correct. The facts have to be correct. Attribution. A good news story has a lot of attribution. You reveal the sources of the news. Completeness. A good news article doesn't have holes in it. It tries to answer all of the questions to provide the context and the analysis necessary for understanding the truth behind the facts. And of course, objectivity. Not full of personal opinion or feelings, but a detached, objective take on the world around us. This is the truth that we expect from journalism. Now, we also expect this notion of objectivity, and this is the state of being neutral, nonpartisan, unbiased, not influenced by your emotions or personal prejudices. Journalists are expected, they're required to assume a position of disinterestedness or impartiality. Is this possible for anybody to operate completely unbiased and objectively? Of course not. We are full of psychological dimensions that include confirmation bias and stereotypes and all kinds of prejudices, some of which might not even be conscious. They might be subconscious. So it's very, very difficult to be objective. That's why scientists have a very rigorous scientific method to follow to try and guarantee objectivity in the pursuit of the truth. But journalists are expected to strive to do the very best they can to be objective, and many of them are able to pull this off, to remain objective. Now, not all journalism is about being objective and neutral. Okay? There is one category of journalism called advocacy journalism, and it's a subgenre of journalism that's intentionally and transparently trying to adopt a viewpoint, usually for some social or political purpose. Many documentaries advocate a particular point of view. As long as the creators of the content are transparent about their intentions, okay, there's a place for advocacy journalism, I believe, in our society. Now, journalists should never practice any kind of deception in order to get a story, but occasionally it does happen. Let me talk about the world of undercover reporting. We don't see this often, this investigative technique, going undercover, disguising your identity, lying and spying in order to capture a story. But it does occasionally happen, and the reporters who do this are practicing deception. They are disguising or hiding their true identities and their true purposes. Now, most journalists will turn to a basic three-part test to justify this kind of reporting, this investigative, participatory, underground reporting. Okay, first, the information has to be vital to the public interest. It has to be a truly important story that's vital to the public. There should be no other way to get the information. And the methods and the reasoning should be fully disclosed. Now, if you can clear that three-part hurdle, it might justify some level of deception. In other words, the ends might justify the means. One of my favorite examples of this undercover investigative reporting is the famous Mirage Tavern series done by the Chicago Sun-Times back in the 70s. You know, Chicago has always been known as a city of corruption, and small businesses like taverns often have to pay off the police and the building inspectors. This is called the shakedown. Well, in order to prove that this was happening, a newspaper in Chicago actually purchased a tavern, and they pretended to be the owners, and they set up hidden cameras and microphones, and it worked. They caught a number of public officials, fire inspectors, building inspectors, police officers. They caught them red-handed trying to shake down the business. Okay. So the Sun-Times bar uncovered all kinds of payoffs and corruption, and it did have a positive result. Okay? It brought attention to this problem and led to some reform, and it probably should have won a Pulitzer Prize, but the newspaper didn't, and the reporters didn't, and largely because of the controversial nature of the news gathering techniques. So undercover reporting can be very valuable, but it has to be used cautiously and with a lot of prudence. Now, there's other forms of deception in journalism, and occasionally journalists will get caught doing this, and it further erodes the integrity and the credibility of journalism as a profession and as an important institution. Reenactments and staging, this is another absolute in journalism, a categorical imperative. You don't do recreations, okay, in order to get the dramatic video that you want. A very famous case of this happened back in the 1990s. NBC News Dateline did an expose, an investigative report on a General Motors truck that they said was designed in ways that were faulty, and the truck was actually waiting to explode anytime it got into a serious rear-end collision. Now, they tested this, and they found out that the truck didn't explode. So in one of the tests, they decided to help it along by installing some fireworks, okay, to produce a dramatic effect. Well, you cannot fabricate reality in the world of news. If you do, you're going to get fired and probably blacklisted from the profession. All right, another ethical issue is the use of what are called anonymous sources. Now, some people, especially our current president, hates the news media for using anonymous sources. In fact, he has said publicly in several tweets that anonymous sources are bullshit and that the public should ignore them, and they're just a way for people to attack his campaign and his presidency. Well, you know, anonymous sources sometimes are very important. Sometimes people will not tell the truth unless you guarantee anonymity. Right? People are afraid to tell the truth. They're afraid of reprisal. They're afraid of retribution. And sometimes the only way a journalist can get information is by promising anonymity. Now, journalists know that this is a problem area, okay? But I would not take the advice of Trump. Anytime you see a story about me or my campaign saying sources said, do not believe it. There are no sources. They're just made up lies. Not true. Okay. The journalists work very carefully with their editors to talk about the anonymous sources and make decisions about the information. The Society of Professional Journalists is a national professional association that represents the interest of journalists since 1909. And they have an interesting code of ethics, and they have some statements about this use and some of anonymous sources and some suggestions. Okay, first, the SPJ says journalists should identify sources wherever feasible. You shouldn't use anonymous sources unless it's absolutely necessary. The public is entitled to as much information as possible about the source so they can make judgments about the source's reliability. And a second admonition is always question the source's motives before promising anonymity. Clarify conditions attached to any promises made in exchange for information, and then keep those promises. If you believe that a source has a good motive for anonymity and you give it, keep that promise. Let's examine some journalistic codes of ethics. I want to introduce you to a couple of them. Codes of ethics are very important. They signify that a profession takes itself seriously, that it has ethical obligations, and they do provide some guidance for the followers of the code or the practitioners. So there's two big organizations that represent journalists in America. Many of the electronic journalists, the radio, TV, and internet journalists, are represented by a group called the Radio Television Digital News Association. This is headquartered in Washington, D.C. And they have a code of ethics, the RTDNA, which covers 6 main topics. And also, you can use these topics to evaluate journalistic performance. If you come up with a case study or a topic for an assignment in this class that deals with journalism, of course you want to consult a code of ethics, professional ethics, to see if you can find some guidance. So 6 main topics. First, public trust. You know, professional journalists should recognize that their first obligation is to the public. It's not to themselves, their own careers, their employer, okay? The company for which they work. Their ultimate obligation is to the public. Truth. Journalists should pursue truth aggressively and present the news accurately, in context, and as completely as possible. Another important obligation to get at the truth. Fairness. Professional journalists should present the news fairly and impartially. The main news value should be significance. How significant is the story? How many people does it affect? And how relevant is the story to most of the people in the population? And to cover that story fairly. Integrity. Now, this is kind of a broad category that the RTDNA dumps a lot of ethical issues into. Integrity. But to this group, it means that the journalist should present the news with integrity and decency. So no conflicts of interest, respect the dignity of the audience, and respect the subjects of the news. Independence. Very important for the news media to be independent, especially independent of the government or the giant corporations or any other major special interest or political interest, for example. True journalists strive to be independent, objective, independent from anybody seeking influence or control over the news content. And finally, accountability. You don't see a lot of this. You don't see a lot of admissions that mistakes have been made. But professional journalists should recognize that they're accountable for their actions to the public, to the profession, and to themselves. A sense of accountability. So that's a solid ethical framework for journalists to consider. Another journalistic code of ethics was put forth by a group called the Society of Professional Journalists, SPJ. And the SPJ Code of Ethics has 4 broad topics that are worth considering, and use these to evaluate journalistic performance. They're the actions of journalists. Seeking the truth and reporting it. Okay, the SPJ says ethical journalism should be accurate and fair. Journalists should be honest and courageous in gathering, reporting, and interpreting information, seeking the truth, a very high calling. Minimizing harm. Ethical journalism treats sources, subjects, colleagues, members of the public as human beings that deserve respect. Act independently. The highest and primary obligation of ethical journalism is to serve the public. Serving the public interest, not profit, should be the highest obligation of any journalist. And accountability and transparency. Ethical journalism means taking responsibility for your work and explaining your decisions to the public and owning up and admitting when you make a mistake. Now, how well do the media, the news media, live up to these codes of ethics? Well, you'll have to make your own judgments about that. There are groups out there that call themselves media watchdogs. They're the ones who watch the news media and kind of check the performance of the news media. Most of these groups tend to be highly ideological and rather polarized. But if you turn to these, you might find good examples of recent ethical issues and situations and concerns that might serve for topics, for assignments, presentations, other work in this class. Anyway, if you like the conservative spin, then go to the Media Research Center. That group is constantly criticizing almost all the other media for having some sort of horrible liberal bias. Now, if you're a liberal and you like liberal criticism of the media, go to Media Matters for America. Go to that website. Media Matters takes a hypercritical look at conservative media, Fox News, conservative talk radio, and you'll see quite a split, okay, in the analysis and the criticism of the media, totally based on ideological concerns. Anyway, it's a good source of topics for assignments in the class. Anyway, that's all for this video. Some of the basic expectations of journalists and the ethical obligations of all journalists. In the next video, we'll continue to talk about some of the obligations of the people who work in the news media to inform us. So, continue, please, to practice all those safety measures. Be prudent about your behavior right now as we continue to cope with this national crisis. Please take care of yourselves and all of the people around you. So long for now.